Act 3. I suppose this is technically scene 4. We've got a scene 4 because of the breakup of the file, so we're going to say Act 3, scene 5, but chapter 4. Scene 6? Scene 6, chapter 4. The math is what it is. And the puppy says hi. Mrs. Olinsky sat waiting until all of the members of her class were seated. Then she introduced herself. I am Mrs. Olinsky. I am one of those people who gets to use all those good parking spaces at the mall. She turned toward the blackboard and wrote in big block letters, Mrs. Olinsky, paraplegic. As she wrote paraplegic, Mrs. Olinsky spelled it out. P-A-R-A-P-L-E-G-I-C. It means that I am paralyzed from the waist down. Mrs. Olinsky had thought about what she would say to this, her first 6th grade class in 10 years. She wrote it all down, revised, memorized, and rehearsed until she could deliver her lines with a light touch. Her voice held steady, but her hands did not. And the O of Olinsky was the rough shape of an oil spill. There was a student in the back, Hamilton Knapp. Then a student in the back, Hamilton Knapp, stood up. Excuse me, Mrs. Olinsky, he said, hesitating slightly, mispronouncing her name. I can't see what you've written. Could you write a little higher on the blackboard, please? Mrs. Olinsky replied, Not at the moment, and managed an embarrassed smile. The rest of her prepared remarks flew out of her head. She thought she had thought of everything, but here she was with a problem about sight lines to the blackboard. Given time, she would figure it out, but she wished it had not come up on the very first hour of her very first day back. As Hamilton Knapp sat down, she laughed nervously. I was about to tell you that being a paraplegic does not mean there's anything wrong with my hearing or my eyesight, but I guess we'll have to figure out what to do about the eyesight of those of you who will be seated in the back of the room. Mrs. Olinsky decided that she would write nothing more on the blackboard for the rest of the morning, but would leave what she had already written right there so she could check it out after lunch. She would return before the rest of the class, wheel herself to the back of the room while it was still empty, and check out the sight lines. She took the roll, checking on the spelling and pronunciation of each child's name, and passed out general supplies and the books for the social studies she would be teaching. Finally, she assigned seats in alphabetical order, last names first. The year of her accident, Mrs. Olinsky had had 2 Jennifers in her class. This semester, Jennifer was out of fashion and J names for boys were in. She had J names for Jared to Julian, including 2 Jasons. When she returned from lunch and saw cripple written on the blackboard, she knew more than the names had changed. 6th graders had changed. Ethan finished answering the 4-part question about the history of the state of New York. The first women's rights convention, organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Auburn was the home of Harriet Tubman, who ran the Underground Railroad. Okay, so Dad used to do the commissioner's voice, but Dad is grocery shopping right now, so I'm going to do my best to do my dad commissioner's voice. Have patience. That registers 6 points for the Epiphany team, the commissioner said. There was a spontaneous burst of applause from their side of the aisle that was immediately suppressed by the commissioner. I must admonish the audience not to applaud. It is distracting to both teams. Mrs. Olinsky remembered the day that rude applause had distracted a performance. Her 4th choice had been causing her problems, but it had been on the very day when rude applause interrupted a play that she had made the 4th and final choice for her team. It was a Saturday afternoon after they became the Souls, sometime after they had finished their 4:00 tea, when Julian had said, We must have a project. And Noah had asked, Isn't peeling wallpaper enough? Julian grinned and said no. He took a small object from his pants pocket and kept it hidden in his fist. He rested his hands lightly on the edge of the table. And the calligraphy lessons, aren't they enough? Julian said no, and Noah asked, Now what? Nadia said, I think Julian already has something in mind. Indeed I do. Julian turned his fist over and opened his hand. There within his palm was a small ivory monkey, only 2 inches high. He laid it on the table and waited until each of the souls had inspected it thoroughly before saying, Gopal gave me this little structure. It can do tricks. Julian then stood the little figure first on one foot, then on the other, one arm, and then the other. You see, this monkey can balance on any one of its 4 limbs. Noah asked, What is that supposed to mean? Ethan replied, I think it has something to do with Mrs. Olinsky. Julian smiled broadly. Indeed it does. Mrs. Olinsky? Noah repeated. Mrs. Olinsky? What? I think that Julian wants us to help her, Ethan explained. Help her do what? Noah asked. Nadia said, stand on her own 2 feet. Have you never heard that expression, Noah? Of course I have heard that expression, but fact. Mrs. Olinsky cannot stand on her own 2 feet, and further fact, she obviously... Noah's voice trailed off as he understood. I get it, he said. I get it. It is scary trying to stand on your own 2 feet, especially when you don't have a leg to stand on, so to speak. Julian rubbed the little ivory monkey. There are some in the school who try to get her off balance. Some are in our homeroom. We can give her some support. Ethan said, better than that. The dog is still helping. She found the window. Better than that, Nadia said. We can give her a lift. They all turned to Noah. What do you suggest? They asked, knowing that Noah would have an answer. And he did. The commissioner reached into the bowl again. He allowed his hand to touch bottom before spreading his fingers to pick up the next question. An acronym is defined as a word formed from the initial letters of a series of words. For example, radar is an acronym for radio detecting and ranging, RA from radio, D from detecting, A from and R from ranging. Can you give me 2 more examples of acronyms that have entered our language as words? Julian Singh's buzzer went off. Bosh and dip, he called out. Act 4, Scene 1. Julian narrates when Ginger played Annie's Sandy. It was the Saturday of Thanksgiving weekend that Ethan Potter suggested to Nadia Diamondstein that she have Ginger play Annie's Sandy. I had no idea what he was talking about. I knew, of course, that Ginger referred to Nadia's beloved and talented dog, so I thought perhaps Annie's Sandy was a video game played by the canine orders. However, the word play referred to playing a part in a musical show about an orphan named Annie in a show called Annie, and Sandy was the name of the dog belonging to the title character. Epiphany High School was putting on the play for the holiday season. Till we moved to Epiphany, I had no idea. Oh, I'm sorry, I've missed the narrator. Okay. I will back up now. It was the Saturday of Thanksgiving weekend that Ethan Potter suggested to Nadia Diamondstein that she have Ginger play Annie Sandy. I had no idea what he was talking about. I knew, of course, that Ginger referred to Nadia's beloved and talented dog, so I thought perhaps that Annie Sandy was a video game played by the canine orders. However, the word play referred to playing a part in a musical show about an orphan named Annie in a show called Annie, and Sandy was the name of the dog belonging to the title character. Epiphany High School was putting on the play for the holiday season. Until we moved to Epiphany, I had no idea how busy Americans are between Thanksgiving and New Year's Day, the time they refer to as the holiday season. Everyone asks, are you ready for the holidays? And then afterward, they ask, how are your holidays? During the holidays themselves, no one asks about them. When Ethan suggested that Nadia have Ginger try out, Nadia said, Ginger does not do ARF. Another remark I did not understand. I did not intend to ask. I knew that if I waited, an explanation would come. It did. The play Annie is based on an American comic strip called Little Orphan Annie, and when Annie Sandy speaks, the balloon over his head is written off. Everyone had already been cast for the high school production, but not the dog Sandy, and Mrs. Reynolds, the play's director, had put a notice on the bulletin board that anyone with a well-trained dog could try out. Ethan said, they call that a cattle call. Noah said, why would they call it a cattle call if they are asking for dogs? Ethan said, it's a theatrical saying. It means an open audition. Even if they mean people, they call it a cattle call. Then what do they call a cattle call? Noah asked. Ethan replied, a roundup, I guess. He turned to Nadia and said, Ginger's bark will do very well. Besides, she looks a lot like Sandy, except her eyeballs aren't blank. In time, I came to understand that remark too. The artist who drew the comic strip never drew irises on the eyes of people or dogs. Noah said, there is one other thing. Nadia ignored Noah. She said to Ethan, If I do have Ginger try out, she will get the part. Ginger is a genius. Noah said, Nadia, my dear, Noah insisted, Sandy is a male, and, fact, Ginger is a, if you'll excuse the expression, a bitch. From everything I've ever learned in health education. Hold on, I lost the place. From everything I've ever learned in health education, she will not be able to play this role. Nadia said, Noah, is there any subject in this whole world that you do not know more about than every other being on this planet? Noah shrugged. Noah shrugged. Not every other being on the planet. Let's just say every other being in this room. Do you have a dog? She asked. No, but just answer the question, do you have a dog? No, but just answer the question, have you ever had a dog? No, but just answer the question, have you ever had a dog? No, Nadia said. I rest my case. Noah would not give up. Have you ever had allergies that kept you from having a dog? He asked. No. Have you ever had a brother who had allergies that kept you from having a dog? No, I have not, and neither have you. Have you ever had a brother? No. Ethan interrupted. Getting back to Ginger. You ought to let her try out. Nadia said, I shall. She will get the part, and they will consider themselves lucky, which they should, because Ginger is a genius. The bickering between Nadia and Noah no longer made me uncomfortable. As a matter of fact, I had begun to enjoy it, and so had we all, including Noah and Nadia. Once Nadia made her decision to have Ginger try out for the part, I told them that in the days when I had travelled with my parents on the cruise line, I saw a number of animal acts. There were not many, for keeping animals on board ship is not easy. I explained that wild animals were out of the question, as were the larger varieties of domestic animals such as cow or horse. There was a monkey once, but it was a terrible thief. The monkey, whose name was Sapphire, his hind quarters were bright blue, would swing down from a flagpole or railing and steal shiny objects like pens or barrettes or, even worse, jewelry. Sapphire would always drink anything that was left unattended in a cup or a glass. As a result, Sapphire was often drunk and incapable of bladder control. Most passengers were not amused, and the captain had Sapphire and his owner put off the ship at the next port. Most of the animal acts on board ship involved dogs, I explained. From watching them, I learned what trainers do. So it was that even before the cattle call, the souls began the intensive training of Ginger. I taught each of the souls how to palm a treat so that no one in the audience would notice. First, we taught Ginger to respond to Nadia, and then Nadia fused with Ethan, and then Ethan with Noah, then Noah with me, until at last Ginger would respond to the treat and not the person. We trained Ginger to accept the treat without excessive salivating. Most people who are not dog owners, and even many who are, do not care much for a tongue bath. Ethan got a copy of the script. In the play, the policeman asks, "Is that your dog, little girl?" And Sandy is supposed to bark. We taught Ginger to bark on cue, and the more she did it, the more it sounded like off. Ginger had learned her lines. Ginger had learned her cues. Ginger was a genius. I'm going to pause the recording here and do the next section, but I want to note that in the earlier section, Noah, what he actually says is pretty transphobic, so I'm going to read it here if you want to hear what he actually said. Nadia, my dear, Noah insisted. Sandy is a male, and fact, Ginger is a, if you'll excuse the expression, a bitch. From everything I've ever learned in health education, genes, not genius, determine, if you'll excuse the expression, sex. Fact, unless Ginger visits a plastic surgeon, she won't fit the part.